Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. Some 45 days before Joe Biden's movers vacate the White House for the new tenant, who returns to the place he reluctantly left 4 years ago, the looming Trump presidency has an evident impact on Middle Eastern dynamics. A major topic, as always, is the Iranian nuclear project. Trump's record is known in Tehran, but so is his expressed wish to turn a new page and reach a fresh deal, which will block the Iranian quest for nuclear weapons in exchange for lifting the sanctions which curtail the Iranian economy. In anticipation of that policy and mindful of the personnel choices that Trump made in staffing his administration, Iran has been making a crude effort to hoard enriched fissile material and ignore its obligations to allow monitoring and inspections of its facilities. This will supposedly give it a better hand once the card game with Trump resumes. How effective is this tactic, and is there a risk that from bargaining Iran could shift to breakout and achieve an initial nuclear weapon posture? To analyze it, we're joined by Professor David Albright, founder and president of the Institute for Science and International Security. Welcome, sir.
Good to be here.
It's a pleasure. Also joining us from Central Israel is Dr. Uzi Arad, who is a former national security advisor here in Israel, as well as a Mossad division chief. It's a pleasure to have you, Uzi.
Good to be here. Thank you.
And with me in the studio, of course, our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, set the stage for us.
So there is an obvious escalation in rhetoric, especially following the IAEA censoring Iran for its various sins, mostly sins of omission rather than commission. But as we are on the eve of the Trump presidency, it is obvious that Iran is trying to take his measure by threatening, perhaps bluffing, saying quite expressly, publicly, that it will enrich more uranium to a higher level, will fix more facilities with extra equipment, perhaps even convince the supreme leader to change his fatwa. Whether there is such a fatwa or not is an open question, forbidding nuclear weapons. It seems like an opening tactic, an opening minuet, if you will, in the expectation that Trump, once in office, will offer it an olive branch.
Indeed. Well, Professor Albright, I'd like to start with you. You're a distinguished scientist who've been following this and publishing on this extensively for years on, and I'd like to take this opportunity to ask you to characterize the current state of Iran's nuclear proliferation amid a reality in which the International Atomic Energy Agency, including its in the latest reports by Secretary General Rafael Grossi, explicitly note that they don't have enough information to fill in the blank, so to speak, in light of so many years in which the Islamic Republic has been in breach of its obligations, not only under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, but also under the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty.
I think one of the most concrete signs of the lack of the inspector's ability to see what's going on is that it has no idea how many centrifuges are being made. It used to be able to monitor that. And there's been a series of surprises over the last 6 to 9 months where Iran deploys many more centrifuges than were expected. And it's just threatened to do that again. And so you have to worry that there's a large number of centrifuges we don't see that could be reserved for some secret site. And so that lack of transparency is one of the most concrete indicators that the inspectors cannot do their job. Now, beyond that, they can't do their job to basically say, does Iran have a nuclear weapons program? They have to every quarter say, we don't know. And that when they do work on it, have concrete evidence of, they call it undeclared nuclear material, that was associated with a former nuclear weapons program, they get nowhere. And so what we've ended up with is a situation where currently Iran could break out and make enough weapon grade uranium very quickly. We estimate at the Institute in as little as a week, and then produce several more quantities of weapon grade uranium in that same month. And so you have a situation where Iran no longer faces any kind of bottleneck on producing weapon grade uranium. It can essentially make much more than it ever dreamed of making back when it had a very active nuclear weapons program in the early 2000s. Now, we're all kind of probing into the dark, at least in the public sphere. How quickly could they weaponize that weapon grade uranium into a weapon? And at my institute, again, we think they could make a crude device in as little as 6 months, maybe even a little shorter. It's not going to be delivered by a missile, but that it could be enough to establish a status as a nuclear power and force everyone to kind of rethink their strategies on Iran and put tremendous pressure, I would just say, on Israel to strike before there's a weapon and work out a strategy to do that. So I think we're in a very, very dangerous situation and no way to predict what's going to happen.
Absolutely. Very alarming indeed. Dr. Arad, I'd like to hear your take on this, particularly also since Israel has retrieved much of the data related to the Ahmad program that was active until at least reportedly 2003. To what degree are the findings of that data indicative of Iranian intentions to follow through on its intentions to pursue that nuclear weapon capabilities, particularly at a time when it is, some may say, with its back against a wall?
Well, the Ahmad plan was a concrete plan, well-defined in terms of deadlines and timetable, which was to be concluded by the possession of a number of warheads at a certain date to be deployed in a position of an operational capacity. So that was the plan as it was then. How the current program is being defined, whether there is a real internal deadline by which they want to accomplish something as concrete, as intangible as finished and assembled bombs and possibly tested and so forth, that we don't know, at least I don't know. So it leaves us very much in this situation that Dr. Albright just stipulated, which is highly dangerous, because we must assume, I think, that they do have a plan which would conclude the same way the program was in the past, namely in the possession of such weapons. But how this is paced, is there any flexibility there? Do they also intend to calibrate the progression in that plan in accordance with the kind of economic and political pressures put on them? But whichever way you look at it, Israel will certainly have to look at what is happening, and assuming that there will be a sense that they are advancing closer and closer to that tangibility, then it has to calculate the merit of a preemptive strike, which it has demonstrated. Some capabilities have been demonstrated it is capable of.
Indeed. Mr. Owen, naturally, the Islamic Republic is quite in the understanding that a Trump administration would not allow it to break through without severe consequences. Nevertheless, this has not necessarily brought it to pull back from its ongoing belligerent activities, particularly when we're talking about the increase of installations of various cascades, but also it is in tandem operating on the diplomatic sphere to try and reignite some sort of diplomatic, I don't know if it's a ploy or not, but a diplomatic process with the three European powers, namely Britain, France, and Germany. What are we to take out of that? Is this some sort of signal that should be taken seriously?
Well, as you remember, the E3, if Britain is still an E,
It's still European.
Yes, but it is not part of the European Union. This was the
The
original.
European Union is not Europe.
E3. They of course started this whole diplomatic move with some Israeli help when Israel didn't want to be in the crosshairs of Iran, and Israel at that time, some 20 odd years ago, justifiably wanted the world, the West, along with China and Russia, to take center stage. But Iran is not going to capitulate. It wants to capitalize on what it has in order to get sanctions relief and perhaps other goods or goodies. But the situation now, because China and Russia were at loggerheads with the Biden administration, and we don't know what will happen during the next Trump term, what happens, and obviously in all capitals, or in the Israeli case in Tel Aviv, there are simulations and wargaming going on. What happens if Iran withdraws from the NPT regime and there is no enforcement mechanism now because you need Security Council work, and the United States cannot do it alone? We used to think that there is a superpower or big power collaboration against those countries which will clandestinely get nuclear weapons, thereby contravening their commitments to the IAEA under the NPT regime, and therefore there will be some punishment. But it is not certain at all. So Iran will probably wait to see how the United States under Trump is engaging Russia and China before it makes any bold move.
Indeed. Dr. Albright, I'd like to hear your take on this as well. But beyond that, what could you tell, potentially in layman's terms, to European diplomats currently engaged? What should they focus on, particularly at a time when the Islamic Republic is seemingly ratcheting up its efforts to position itself even in a more problematic situation in order to start a certain game of diplomacy once the Trump administration takes office?
I'm afraid I'm a little more pessimistic. I think Iran is doing what it's often done. Is the Board of Governors of the IAEA censures it. They've now asked for a report, which will be highly embarrassing to Iran. So they escalate. Excuse me. This time they're basically installing all the centrifuges that they, or let's say enriching in all the centrifuges they had installed, and then adding more. And they did not start making weapon grade uranium or leave the non-proliferation treaty. But I think that they're on an escalatory path, that it moves very incrementally, and then they just see what happens. Now, one would have expected that by now, given the massive violations of Iran on the nuclear deal, that the E3 would have snapped back sanctions, as they call it, under the old nuclear deal, and brought back all the 2015 UN Security Council sanctions, reimposed the missile and arms embargo, and that can be done, as you all know. It can just be done. No, Russia and China can't stop it. But what it would do is it would delegitimize Iran's nuclear enrichment program again, and make it easier to construct a kind of a positive strategy to pressure Iran. And then with the Trump administration people, they certainly would support what they've euphemistically called maximum pressure. So I think we're just engaged in the same old thing, and Iran sees a different player, tougher one, but and I would say a more unpredictable one, and that could work for us or against us, for those who want to keep Iran from building nuclear weapons. But I think we're by no means in a good place, and the EU E3 is unfortunately doing the kind of things it's done so often in the past. If Iran makes a small concession toward negotiations, they could leap on it, and the point of it is that it delays the E3 reimposing the snapback mechanism, or I'm sorry, not reimposing, but imposing the snapback mechanism under the UN Security Council Resolution 2231, which expires next October. It just goes away. So there is a clock ticking too. And I think the E3 and the United States need to sit down and work out a very tough policy on Iran to force it, in a sense, diplomatically and through incentives, whatever you want to put on the table, but make sure that they step back significantly from the ability to build a bomb.
Staying on that same line, the Europeans have asked the IAEA Board of Governors to provide, basically, or the Director General or the Secretariat to provide a elaborate report up until 2025, the spring of 2025, which is just shy several months or weeks of the expiration date for the snapback mechanism. Is that a attempt to appease the Iranians, to try and bring them back into the fold, or what is the true meaning of this move?
The E3 has wanted to escalate this confrontation faster than the Biden administration, but the Biden administration was trying to pull back the E3, which is, in a way, is rather remarkable. And what the E3 did was, in a sense, grab on what the U.S. had supported through speeches, and that's this comprehensive report. But the main purpose of it will be to create a justification for additional action. The problem could be that the IAEA will drag its feet. Grossi in recent times has been more for negotiations and giving Iran time than for bringing this to a head where some hard decisions have to be made. So I think the ideal situation is to take Grossi at what he said at a press conference recently. It was before the resolution passed. He said, well, we have everything we need to write a report. There's nothing more. So one would hope he would actually act on what he said and produce a report within the next month or so. If he has everything he needs, then just do it, and then allow the E3 in the United States with a new president to try to work out the best way forward.
Indeed. He does also have his own calculations, and he did explicitly stress during that same press conference, his last, that he is not bound by the timeline of any expiration dates of the UN Security Council Resolution 2231. But Dr. Arad, I'd like to hear your take on this.
Yeah, I think that most people here in Israel are awaiting the possibility that some halt would be given to the current fighting near our borders, both in Gaza and in Lebanon, not only in order to resolve whatever outstanding issues presented themselves, but so that one would be able to concentrate on the Iranian issue, which, as long as these things were taking place here, were diverting Israeli attention from doing what it should. Whether it should be done unilaterally, that's one thing. It's always on the agenda. But at the same time, I think most realize that this should be a joint strategy by the E3, by the United States. The expectation is indeed that Trump should enter office. That comes close. Whether there would be some action taken by Grossi and others in terms of a report that would galvanize some kind of political international coordination of a strategy, I think that the Israeli interest is in seeing all that going ahead, so that indeed such a strategy should be established with all the relevant partners who were there trying to block the progression of Iran further, so that they could coordinate also the measures that they intend to take. At the moment, we've not reached that point here in Israel in which such attention by Israel is given to the Iranian issue, with a single exception that should Iran attempt or make good on its threat to take revenge for our attack, and should they do something, then it would be Israel's decision to decide what to do in that context and whether the counter-Israeli reprisal would also have a nuclear dimension to it.
Well, Mr. Olin, there was a side document to the ceasefire arrangement that was outlined by the United States and France with regard to Lebanon, a document that was actually an agreement between the United States and Israel to redirect their attention to Iran, and an American pledge that in the event of an Iranian breakout, they would stand by Israel to confront that threat and thwart any attempt to do so. What are we to make out of that?
We are in a very unique situation of two presidents governing the United States at the same time. We are at the twilight of the Biden presidency, but also the sunrise, or the Florida sunrise, of the Trump administration, with world leaders jetting to Mar-a-Lago.
Wouldn't that be a breach of the Logan Act?
No, nobody's going. He has immunity, so it doesn't matter. But we haven't seen MBS there yet. And obviously, the United States would like to consult with Saudi Arabia before it does anything with a lot of significance vis-a-vis Iran. Also, one of Trump's marquee pledges is that he is going to end all forever wars. He's not going to start one. So saying that he's going to back Israel does not mean that there will be direct American involvement in a war with Iran, because it's not going to be a one-off strike. Even though lately, when the Israeli Air Force struck a Hezbollah target, it made sure that the illustration that the IDF spokesperson issued showed that it can hit a hidden target 70 meters deep in a mountainside. So it was a signal to Iran that we don't need the Americans, we can do it on our own. But these are all very initial tactics, ploys. We still have to wait until late January, early February to know where we are. And the fact that Mike Pompeo did not get any senior job may have something to do with his being too hawkish for Trump's taste right now. Of course, there was some infighting, but the upshot is that the leading proponent of the maximum pressure is not there. At least the Iranians can see it this way.
Well, with regard to Mike Pompeo, I think he should speak to his other the reasons for not entering into the Trump administration in a future date. I'm not going to delve into that since he's a colleague, but nevertheless, I'd like to take this opportunity, since we don't have very much time left. Professor Albright, Dr. Arad, in 1.5 minutes each, whatever you would like to focus on, this is your opportunity. Please, Professor Albright, we'll start with you.
Well, one is I'd like to say, as an American, how deeply appreciative we are of Israel's commitment to trying to make sure Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. And I think the Israeli government leadership under various prime ministers have been very steadfast in a sense, leading the way, and at times walking with the United States president, at other times trying to drag him along. And I think we're now entering a time where I think we can walk together and see our leaders walk in the same direction. So I feel in that sense optimistic that Iran can be prevented from getting a nuclear weapon. And already President Trump has done something which was surprising, is he kind of reached out to Iran in a way to say, look, maybe there's a deal at hand. That undercut Iran's hardliners that just wanted to, in a sense, build the bomb. And it introduced a lot of uncertainty into Iranian calculations. And I think we now, until January, don't have to worry so much about them racing to get a bomb. And then let's see. And as I said, I feel that with Israel and the United States working together on this, that Iran can be prevented from building the bomb.
Absolutely. Dr. Arad?
Yes, I hope that some of the steps taken and the postures taken would have the effect of de-escalating what still may be on an escalatory curve. In that relationship, the fact that Hezbollah, as a kind of an insurance instrument on behalf of the Iranians, has been crippled to that effect, may have a restraining effect on Iran. And rather than coming to the rescue of Hezbollah, they should be very cautious not to take this into this dynamic. So I do hope that with a judicious kind of a maneuvering by many of the international group that are confronting Iran, wanting to prevent it from going forward on a nuclear, we would see that having an effect on Iran, and that it would probably pursue, this time with real intent, some kind of a slowing down, possibly in the context of a deal. Whether that would take them back in terms of their program depends indeed on the determination of the international group that would be, in effect, negotiating with it. And I hope that this would succeed. Nobody's sure, but certainly the option is there and the potential is also there.
In any event, in contrast to the first Trump administration, which had only 1.5 years to impose a maximum pressure campaign on the Iranians, this time around, the Iranians will have to deal with it, as the former Iran envoy of the Trump administration said, namely Brian Hook, from day one. We will see the maximum pressure campaign imposed upon the Islamic Republic of Iran, and therefore the calculus may be different. But this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to immediately thank Professor Albright, Dr. Arad, and Mr. Oren for all of your insights, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.